Gentlemen, may I ask you to take your seats? And if you're still talking to one another, stop doing that at the moment. Thank you very much. It's very busy here at the COP. So there's a lot of noise also from the other pavilions who are very active here today. Very welcome here in our pavilion. My name is Agnes Mulder. I'm a member of Dutch House of Representatives and the chair of the Committee of Economic Affairs and Climate. And together with my colleague Raoul Bouke from D66, there are a couple of Dutch MPs here in the front row. So if you want to talk to them afterwards, you're very welcome, of course. I'm also the EU rapporteur in our Parliament for Climate. I will be the moderator during today's interparliamentary side event organized by our Parliament. And I would like to give a warm welcome to everybody and of course our three keynote speakers, members of Parliament, senators, other invited guests and the audience both here in the pavilion and also online. I also want to inform you that this meeting is live streamed. And before we start with the keynote speakers, and one of the keynote speakers is Waver William from the Seychelles. So he's going to be on the screen. You already see him here on the left side. And another one of our parliamentarians from the Netherlands, Joris Thijssen from the Labour Party. I would like to give a brief explanation on today's program and what exactly we will be discussing at this side event. In about half an hour, we will hold interactive debate with all the participants here in the Benelux Pavilion and online. And at this important moment, when the entire world meets again, it is very important for all of us, members of Parliament and senators, to be involved on the debate on climate change. This is not a technical exercise. This comes down to all of our houses, individual families, and we need to be there as parliamentarians representing the people. And we decided today to focus our time on the debate on geopolitics, especially in Europe after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In the beginning of the year, the geopolitical situation had a huge impact on many things, and energy prices skyrocketed because of the brutal invasion by Russia. Europe had to find alternatives for Russian fossil fuels, and which even resulted in reopening coal-fired power plants. So climate change is then the question. Is that still on top of the agenda? And the energy crisis triggered the geopolitical events. They of course have huge effects. But is it still on top of the agenda, is the question. And that's why we decided to focus today debate especially on this question. Geopolitics and climate ambition, do they match? And we have witnessed this year the effects of climate change. I only need to mention the flood in Pakistan. Climate action is more than ever urgently needed, and therefore we want to discuss with you how it can be ensured that climate ambition will not be negatively affected by energy security issues. And before we enter into the debate, you will be inspired by our three keynote speakers, and who are in a very good position, I think, both from a national, European, and also a global perspective. Waver William, that's where you come in, of course. And we will first hear the speech by Mr. Rob Jetten. He's the Minister of the Netherlands for Climate and Energy Policy. And he has taken, he went to several COPs already. As a member of Parliament, we've worked closely together. And this year in his new role as Minister for Climate and Energy Policy. And we are very grateful, of course, to have Diederik Samson here, head of the cabinet of the Vice President of the European Commission. And he's joining us again as keynote speaker, just as he did last year, because he thinks this is a really important subject to all of us, and especially to parliaments. And our third and online keynote speaker joins us all the way from the Seychelles. I mentioned him already, Mr. Waver William, and he's the chair of the International Affairs Committee. in the National Assembly of the Seychelles. I hope, Waven, that you can hear us well. And many thanks to you that you're here today. You'll be the third speaker. And I would like to give now the floor to to our Minister Rob Jetten. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's great to see all of you here. I've been to several COPs as a member of parliament. I'm really happy to see several members of parliament, not only from the Dutch parliament, but also from other European parliaments present at this meeting. And I would like to give a special warm welcome to Barbara Pompili, now member of parliament in the French Republic, but she was a minister during a very important time of negotiations on Fit for 55. And without your help, we wouldn't have agreed on the Fit for 55 package before summer. So thank you for that. Merci beaucoup. Ladies and gentlemen, never let a good crisis go to waste is one of the well-known quotes by Winston Churchill. And what's less well known, however, is that he said this during the formation of the United Nations. And the Second World War was horrific, not just for Churchill's country, but for the entire world. And as a statesman, he realized that the war was necessary to inspire us and to establish the UN. And it's always difficult to make historic comparisons, particularly where it comes to the Second World War. But the fact is that we now have been shaken up by another war on the European continent. And once again, we have to decide how to deal with the consequences of a major catastrophe. And Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine has put values such as liberty, democracy, security, and justice under huge pressure. And the human suffering in the war zone is immense. But the consequences of the war can also be felt far beyond the Ukraine itself. Energy prices have shot up, and so have the costs of food and other products. And for everyone, the future looks more expensive and less certain. And the war also underlines that we need to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels as soon as possible. And that would not only help us increase energy security, it will also help us to accelerate progress on our climate goals. In the short term, however, it has become more difficult to do the right things for climate. One of the most uncomfortable choices I have to make myself in recent months has been having to allow coal-fired power plants in the Netherlands to run more so that we can save gas and guarantee electricity security during this winter. We're also having to help citizens and small companies pay their energy bills. And I would have preferred to invest all that money in sustainable projects, like rolling out hydrogen infrastructure and building more wind farms. In recent months, we've all had to make painful decisions in Europe, decisions that aren't always good for the climate in the short term. But at the same time, I can see that in these circumstances, we've been capable of achieving a great deal if we all make a joint effort. And we need to make sure that the challenges we face now do not determine what the future will look like. We can still accelerate the climate and energy transition. And the war in Ukraine and Europe's dependency on Russian gas have acted as a wake-up call for the whole European Union. The negotiations on Fit for 55 and Repower EU have picked up pace considerably, and proposals have been put forward to further accelerate the rollout of renewables and increase energy efficiency. And all of this probably wouldn't have been achieved as quickly without the sense of urgency caused by the war and the energy crisis. And we've been able to have more energy efficiency than ever before. We're also going to scale up sustainable energy generation through offshore wind power, solar energy, nuclear, and also green hydrogen. And this will help reduce energy prices and make us less dependent on fossil fuels and cut greenhouse gas emissions quicker than we planned. But we're not there yet. In Europe, we will continue to push for more ambitious targets for energy efficiency and renewables in the upcoming 5 years, and for the resulting European legislation to be put into effect through tangible projects in all member states. As members of the national parliaments, you also have a huge part to play in these efforts, because we won't achieve this all overnight by working on our own. It's crucial that we seek to cooperate with countries in and outside the EU, and countries in Africa in particular. We need to work together on sustainable energy, and Africa has a huge potential. It has 60% of the world's theoretical solar energy resources, but only uses 1% of its potential. And Africa's solar potential also presents opportunities for green hydrogen production. And that's why it's so great that Egypt has placed green hydrogen high on the COP27 agenda, and that we're having an EU-Africa energy ministerial. It's high time for Team EU and Team Africa to work together more closely. And participation by other countries will also be crucial. The United States, for example, which seems to be taking positive steps under President Biden, and hopefully after these midterms even more. Australia, which has the potential to lead on renewables, and a new government determined to break with the policies of the past years. For example, India, which has made the development of green hydrogen and wind energy a national priority. China, which is accelerating its climate policies to protect the livability of its own cities. And Brazil, where President-elect Lula plans to make a serious effort to combat deforestation. And also smaller islands, small countries, countries with potential to leapfrog, and small island states that become best practice examples to others. And steps are taken into the right direction, but more action is needed if we want to keep the 1.5-degree goal within reach. To conclude, as members of Parliament, you have a crucial role to play in ensuring that your countries make the right choices, in encouraging your governments to choose to protect the climate, and giving them the instruments they need to achieve their ambitions. And I hope that everyone now understands the need to take action fast. Let's work together to ensure that we emerge from this crisis stronger. Don't let this crisis go to waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for telling us more about the policy in the Netherlands. And of course, now we would like to listen to Mr. Diederik Samson. So the floor is yours. You can do it up here or behind the desk. It's
Maybe I can do
want.
it like this, yeah? Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm always nice to be in the company of former colleagues. Geopolitics and climate, and in your introduction you seem to imply that because of the geopolitical situation we are toning down on our climate ambitions. The opposite is true. We are supercharging the climate ambitions due to this geopolitical crisis. But to be fair, that's absolutely not self-evident. For those of you who have been in the environmental movement for a while, or in the struggle for sustainability, we know from experience that the first victim of every geopolitical crisis, of every political crisis, or of every crisis, is environmental policy. Because in normal circumstances, when there's a crisis, the first response by politicians, but also by the public, is yes, 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 very important, all of that, but now we have more urgent things to do. Let's fight our health crisis in the COVID, for instance. Or now, let's fight this geopolitical energy crisis. So normally, it would be the opposite of what we see today. Normally, indeed, your presumption would have been true. But the opposite is happening right now. And that's something to be, well, it's a cynical truth, but that's something, that's one of the advantages of the current situation. Let me tell you this, the short story about the Green Deal now supercharged into Repower EU. Because I want to talk to you about Repower EU, the extra ambition on top of what we already had in mind when we published the Green Deal in 2019. And for some of those who think that Repower EU was only published and the result of the Ukrainian war, it's not. Because a year before the Ukrainian war started, we already saw within the Union that things were going horribly wrong with our energy supplies. Putin was already fiddling with the gas tap, putting it down, up and down and up. And we started, within the European Union, we started what we called Project 40. the working title for getting rid of the 40% dependence on Russian gas. A 40% dependence of one of our most precious resources of one country, and not a friendly country but an adversary. How on earth, you can conclude in hindsight, how on earth could that happen? Well, we were all part of it. We all watched it. Some of you might have warned us, but most of us didn't. Most of us, well, dwelled in the comfortable situation of having cheap gas. But we now know that that is a fully unsustainable situation that we have to change as soon as we can. And hence the supercharging of the Green Deal. Because Minister Jetten already talked about the ambitions of the Netherlands, supporting increased energy efficiency, supporting increased renewable energy targets, and they are part of REPowerEU. So I count on the support of the Netherlands. One country down. France might be next. No, I'm actually optimistic. But do realize what it means, because in REPowerEU we have pledged to increase the ambition of renewable energy from 40% to 45% by 2030. You might think, well, 5% doesn't sound that much, does it? If you would put that 5% down in solar panels, you have to choose a mix, but just for the sake of argument, make that 5% in solar panels, it's 3,000 square kilometers of solar panels, on top of the ambition we already had. And the ambition on energy efficiency increases from 9% to 12%. You might think, well, that's only marginal, eh? That's the energy consumption of Austria. So within 8 years' time, the European Union will wipe the energy consumption of Austria out of its system. And that's an incredible challenge. One that will require an everyday effort that should have started yesterday. Because every day that we wait longer, the challenge will become bigger. And this is our most important project for the next 8 years. The problem is, we don't have 8 years. We can't have our citizens suffer and wait 8 years for the solution to arrive. We have to act now, we have to act today, and this is where you could argue the harsh reality of geopolitics comes in. Because yes, at the moment, the EU is burning more coal than 2 years ago. And at the moment, the EU is producing more nuclear energy than 2 years ago. By the way, in terms of climate, that's not a bad thing. But for coal, it's a different story. And yes, Rob Jetten and other ministers in Europe had to make a very painful decision to ramp up the production of coal-fired electricity. In total, that will be 100 terawatt hours. That's 2/3 of the Dutch electricity consumption. 2/3 of the Dutch electricity consumption will be produced in extra coal-fired electricity. Something to think about, something to take into account, and something to work on to make it obsolete as soon as we can, and we will. So I know that in these hallways, some countries from other parts of the world, some NGOs, some other stakeholders will tell you the story about Europe backing down from its climate ambitions because of this figure. And that's true. The figure is true, but the context is completely different. Because in its complete context, we are actually doubling down on our climate ambitions. We will end with a higher ambition and a better performance in terms of climate than we had anticipated in the Green Deal. The Green Deal was about 55%. We can now already conclude, after having concluded parts of the legislative process, that we will end up with at least 57% CO2 reduction in 2030, including the extra coal, including the extra nukes, including the current situation. And that's the spirit and the strength of a European Union. Because, and here's my main conclusion, the main reason that today is different from 10 years ago, when in the first crisis we would put any environmental ambition immediately on the back burner instead of putting it on steroids. The difference between 10 years ago and now is a better performance of countries and a better cooperation of countries. The EU is a different animal, a different machine than 10 years ago. We could respond to the COVID crisis quite effectively with the vaccines, with the certificates, and now we can respond to this crisis with 750 billion euros in terms of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, with the Repower ambition, with the joint purchasing of gas from other sources than Russia. If we hadn't had that cooperation, we would have been lost, and every country would have been scrambling for a solution in all different directions, forgetting about that single most important ambition that we have, and that's saving the planet for the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samson. Now, we see you live on screen. Waver William, the floor is yours. Very welcome here at the COP in Egypt. And we've met, of course, several times because we see each other at the Interparliamentarian Union meetings, where many different parliamentarians from around the globe meet and also discuss climate issues. And therefore, I asked you, with your knowledge coming from the Seychelles, to talk to us today and give us your view on this COP and also, of course, on what is happening with Russia a bit, if that has effects on your country or other African countries. Very welcome. The floor is yours, Waver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to see you again online. Excellencies, honorable members of parliaments, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Geopolitics and climate ambitions, do they match? They do not, to a great extent. When you assess the mismatches of country sizes, location, and resources, the differentiated country profiling configurations, visions, and missions also influence the mismatches further based on needs. The geopolitical war conflict between Russia and Ukraine, in the context of interconnectedness and interdependencies, and the global trade inconsistencies, energy and food supplies, amongst others, with the unexpected Ukraine and Russia geopolitical war conflict, is threatening the national security indirectly for some and directly for others. The food and energy supply chain has been disrupted, and global energy and food securities are at risk. We note the energy crisis concerns in Europe and the food security concern of many other countries with regards to this war. Climate change ambitions and pledges naturally will not match with geopolitical war. Paris Agreement commitments of $100 billion by developed countries, which have never been achieved, the current geopolitical war will further impede the process further to meet the targets. European Union against this regional threat in relation to alternative energy sources, there will have to be a shift in outsourcing and investment into both old energy supply sources, to invest more into renewable energy alternatives when regional peace and security further prevails. The war is and will continue to increase the global price hikes across the board. No country will forego national interests to international concern when considered as suicidal by certain political leaders, when assessed as potential national security threat and political agenda of the party in government. Failure to achieve this will and can cause national civic unrest, as historical events and current events happening regionally and globally have shown. Africa region is not spared of this mismatch of climate change emissions to geopolitical wars. Prolonged droughts, flash floods, increased occurrences of global fires and desertification controlling of river water flows to serve national interests of drinking water, energy production, and farm irrigation. All these will increase the national borders' insecurities and enhancing global insecurities as a result of interconnectedness. Border conflicts will increase in Africa. Migration will be an ongoing global trend as livelihoods are affected by effects of climate change, man-made action affecting the environment people depend on. Geopolitical conflicts that cause human displacement will increase and accelerate migration. On the other hand, the quest to maintain political power and control regionally and globally by certain leaders for personal agenda and gains will further influence the mismatches between the geopolitics and climate change ambitions. The targets of the Sustainable Development Goals is under threat more so for most countries in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Global economic stability and security are progressively becoming under attack despite global diplomacy campaign. How long will we continue to limit ourselves from doing what is right? The global diplomacy outreach has to be continuously be reassessed and given more focus for a more comprehensive results for sustainable peace and security. God bless us with a virgin land to maintain and protect, but not to destroy, because of our personal egos. Let us keep the climate change a topmost priority on our day-to-day agenda amidst the global uncertainties. Global ambitious targets should be maintained to assess our efforts, to inspire and redynamize efforts globally. Representatives of the people be the voice, stay relevant and credible for ensuring globally we stay on course towards achieving the nationally determined contributions. Let us act now, as our collective efforts need collective, global, and common political will. I thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us from the Seychelles. How much does the flooding also affect the Seychelles? Can you talk about the situation in your country?
Okay, I mean, we have been experiencing this frequently. It does affect us because we don't have a lot of flatland. It's mountainous, very limited flatlands. And with the sea level rise, you can imagine in the marshes and waterlogged areas, making it very difficult for the agricultural activities. We have to push back development further up on the hill slopes when it comes to infrastructural developments. So we are at risk, and we see this as a national security threat with regards to what is happening in terms of the effects of climate change.
Thank you for talking about this. Of course, now the floor is up to our guest today. And I don't know who has the first question to ask to one of the people in the panel. They, I think, were very clear on their stand of your point of view on the different issues. That it doesn't necessarily has to be a drawback, Mr. Samson said. And of course, the minister was telling also about the things he had to do. But he will continue investing and continue with the policies in the Netherlands. So who wants to be the first to speak? And can you come a bit this way, because unfortunately, and we want to hear it from you, your question. Can you tell us who you are?
I'm Thomas Reeder from the Netherlands, but I think I speak on behalf of all the young people in the room. First, when do young people get an equal seat at the table, also when the billions are being divided? B, both to Mr. Samson and Mr. Jetter, but also to our esteemed MPs and MMPs here, there's 80 billion European money committed for the Green Renovation Wave Fund. I've heard it being talked about for 2 years. A lot of European entrepreneurs and small business and consumers are hurting. This money is committed. Why haven't you released at least a first tranche to do housing isolation, do the fixed brigades, which Mr. Jette is a big fan of, not token money, not token talk, but real work. And please involve, and this should speak to Mr. Jette, involve the educational system. There's 2.5 million people in the educational system in the Netherlands alone. Give them basic energy lessons. They can help their parents, they can help their small and medium businesses, and this will also help you solve the technician shortage. So I'm very curious when you're going to release the first 20 billion or something and get actual things done.
Thank you. Mr. Jetten, our Minister.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to see that there are some members of the youth climate movement in the Netherlands present here, and also the UN youth representatives for the Dutch Kingdom. They have a seat at my table several times a year, and they even text me or send me direct messages on Instagram when we're not doing enough as a Dutch government. So that's good. But we are also implementing a special policy framework to make sure that all big legislation in the Netherlands gets a check on the effect for future generations. And I think this is crucial to make sure that it's not just talks and negotiations every now and then, but that we have a structured way to determine what the effects for future generations are. And we're trying to do the same for also the small islands that are part of the Dutch Kingdom. Coming up to your question on insulation, yes, this energy crisis has shown us one thing, that if you don't want to insulate your house for saving the climate, you want to do it now to lower your energy bills. And the money is there, the techniques is there, but we especially have to find the workforce to get it done. To do it smarter, to do it on a larger scale, to do it together with municipalities and housing organizations. And we're trying to learn the best way forward. But I think everything is in place to deliver in the upcoming 2 to 3 years when it comes to insulations.
You have a seat at the table, which is much more important than the table of policymakers. It's the kitchen table. And I'm serious about it, because I mentioned one of the reasons why this time is different than before, because of the union better cooperating, etc. That was obviously self-promoting stuff. The real reason that this time is different from 10 to 20 years ago is the current youth generation. From experience, I can tell you that in the last 2 to 3 years that we have been building the Green Deal, I've been talking to a lot of people who think they are very important, and sometimes they are. So ministers, CEOs of big companies, high civil servants, you name it. And in all of those conversations, at some point, it turns to their own children. Their own children, asking small questions about, why do we eat meat? Is that something we should do? Or bigger ones, why do we fly to Bali on a holiday? Or pretty existential ones about, hey dad, what are you actually doing to save my future? And if that parent happens to be the CEO of Mercedes-Benz, that's quite an existential question. Because I can tell you, for a CEO of Mercedes-Benz, a bad shareholders meeting is a bad day. A bad headline in the press is a bad day. But not being able to answer your own children is much more than a bad day. And I can tell you that changes policy. So from the kitchen table, you change policy. My generation didn't. In hindsight, we have to be ashamed of it, but we can't do anything about it. Your generation does. Keep up the good work. And about insulation and the money, we have that money. It is not only committed, it's actually spent in terms of the recovery and resilience facility. But insulating your house is actually not about money. It's about people. Because normal people, and we all know it from experience in the last 5 to 10 years, all of you will have had this conversation at home. Hey, we have to do something about the climate. Let's insulate our home. And then you start doing it. You start asking for a construction company to do the work. You see the bill, and you think, well, there's better ways to spend my money. That's what we all do on a daily basis. That has changed in the last 6 to 12 months because of the energy prices. All conversations at kitchen tables have changed. I think that's a much more and a much more important incentive and development. And then obviously we have to stand ready to finance. We have to stand ready to provide the technology. We have to stand ready to provide the people to do the work, but it starts at a kitchen table where somebody decides to renovate its own home, or in a housing corporation where the boardroom decides to renovate 5,000 homes at the same time. Those decisions are being taken right now. Let's get the work done.
Mr. William, how is that with the youth in the Seychelles? How are they involved? Can we get him on the screen? Mr. William, yeah? A question to you. We cannot hear you at the moment.
Yeah, can you repeat the question again, please?
So we were just talking about the effects on the youth, and the question was to both the keynote speakers here in the room, how the youth are being involved in what's happening, what is their position, and how can they make changes together with the grown-ups, so to speak. So how is this in your country, in the Seychelles?
Okay, the youth are very engaged from the very early age, starting from the primary school, secondary schools, and post-secondary. And most of the schools, they have an environmental associations, and they are very involved with members of parliament of all the districts. So their contributions are very valuable, and they are the game changers of tomorrow. So they are really contributing ideas to policymakers.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from that side, and I want to ask one of our participants who is online, our Croatian colleague, to put on her screen as well, so that we can give her the floor for her question after this one.
Thank you. Does it work? Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Okke Roelofsen. I'm the CEO of Power2X. We are a green hydrogen development company based in Amsterdam. And I have a question around geopolitics and energy, of course. So Diederik, especially for you, thank you very much for everything that you have been doing and are doing. I think the way you explained, and Rob, how the kind of balance between policy and climate is a difficult one. Now I have another one for you. This morning I was happy to sign on behalf of a global group of hydrogen producers a global shipping agreement together with the global shippers. And as we were talking about it, then the question came up, how about IRA versus the EU funding? And specifically the kind of big institutions that are funding our projects are literally calling me these last few weeks and months to say, we're going to pull our money out of Europe because the US is so much better. And of course, I mean, we have quite a few projects in Europe, so we are keen to continue in Europe. And we see that ammonia coming from the US might be 200-300 euros per ton cheaper than what we produce here. So the money is there. How do you think about working about this issue?
Thank you.
Well, coincidentally, or actually not, we had a long conversation with Special Envoy on Climate, John Kerry, this morning on exactly this issue. So, I mean, the IRA is as they say in Dutch, a stone in the shoe, a pebble in your shoe for everyone, because we have the same experience. We get bombarded with phone calls in the last few months since the existence of the IRA about companies, first of all, asking what it means, and then when they think they know what it means, asking the same question, hey, shall we pull out of Europe, go to the US? The reality of the IRA is different from the image of the IRA. Let me start with that. So the reality is less damaging than the image, but it's still damaging. But it's nothing new. The history between the US and Europe has been one of, well, promoting our own industry to the verge of protecting your industry against competition from elsewhere. We do the same with many of our instruments. So what we need to do together with the US is have a conversation about balancing out those different support schemes so that we don't do any damage to the overall objective, which is making enough hydrogen. And if you all pull back to the US, we know one thing for certain, you won't make enough hydrogen. You will only make enough hydrogen if it's a worldwide project happening all over the world and in Europe. So the European Commission already committed to a conversation with the US, a tough one, on the ramifications of the IRA and the way to work together. And we're actually pretty optimistic about the conversation, because everyone that we talk to in the US gives us the same message. Yes, we want to promote our own industry, as you do too. We don't want to play protectionists. We have to believe them, and we have to work in good faith to make that happen. And meanwhile, you should continue producing that hydrogen.
Mr. Jetten.
Well, a little bit of a healthy competition between US companies and European companies is, I think, a good thing, because we have to scale up really fast. And the Inflation Reduction Act is mainly about a lot of money, a lot of taxpayers' money, making it cheaper to produce hydrogen in the US. But the European policy is mainly about certification, getting the certification in place for the whole world, getting the infrastructure in place, and getting the business-to-business contracts. For example, through the H2 Global initiative, funded by the Germans, but we are also now investing 300 million euros in it. The European Commission is starting a hydrogen bank. So there is a lot of things going on in Europe to make sure that the business-to-business hydrogen market gets in place. So I think in the end, if we find ways to have a common understanding between the US government and the European Commission, both initiatives could actually speed up the hydrogen transition.
Okay. Very short, because I want to go to the colleague online.
No, thanks for those answers. I won't come up with new questions, but I think the conclusion that we had sort of this morning, and I guess broader, is it would be great if governments can come together and support infrastructure to kind of create this level playing field, and support on the demand side, because then you kind of create a market and then you can compete evenly rather than throwing money at the problem, right?
That's a clear advice. We come to you, our colleague from Croatia. You can ask your question or say what you want to say on the issue. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to join via Zoom. So my name is Sandra Benčić. I'm a chairperson of the Committee for
It's very
Environmental
difficult
Protection
to
of
hear
Persons.
you, so I don't know if it's possible that maybe here
Hey,
in the...
is it better? Is it
that
better now? I'm trying to
think
be
yes.
loud. Is it better? Yeah. Okay, so I'm a chairperson of the Environmental Committee of Croatian Parliament, and I would just maybe point out a few things and basically ask you questions and to see whether we can have a debate on those issues. So basically, the question which is posed by this session, whether the geopolitics and climate crisis that we have now match, or basically, of course, they do not match. But the question is really whether we will ever again have a better geopolitical constellation, and whether things will maybe get even worse. Because climate crisis will definitely spur additional resource crisis, and the geopolitical situation cannot be looked at current geopolitical situation, because and it cannot be used as an argument that we are not putting climate crisis as an absolute priority on the agenda. Recently, United Nations Environmental Program has published a report saying that 1.5 degrees is basically slipping away. And they have also pointed out that not enough financial resources is being put on adaptation strategies. Adaptation strategies are also extremely important in our view in relation to climate justice and regional climate justice. So I would like to ask you, what are the plans, how we can reach the target of $340 billion per year for adaptation strategy, and what is the strategy and approach to to take into account raising inequalities, which are raising not only because of the economic situation and energy crisis, but also because of the climate crisis, into account globally, but also in the European Union, and whether we could also discuss new models of wealth distribution, at least on the EU level, and then also discuss it globally in order to achieve the goals in relation to climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to react first, Diederik?
I couldn't understand all of it exactly, but I think one of the questions was about the gap in finance that we have between the committed, the pledged 100 billion as of 2020. So we're now way over the deadline and we still haven't reached it. And when I say we, I mean the world community. Because the EU is paying its fair share, not only the EU, all its member states obviously together. We pay 23 billion, which if you turn it into our responsibility, it's over the fair share of the European Union. We don't mind. We do mind that others don't pay their fair share and therefore we fall short of 100 billion. The good part of the story is, well, still embarrassing, but next year we will hit the 100 billion. Meanwhile, we are discussing here about new sources of finance needed for new problems because climate change is aggravating instead of going the other direction. And in terms of the 1.5 degree, I think you put it pretty rightly. I think they didn't say it literally like that, but you said slipping away, which is sort of the phrase that you could use at the moment. But we are not giving up. 1.5 degree is still possible. At this COP we should make progress. In all honesty, the progress on mitigation this COP won't be great. But at least we need to make some progress and do not backtrack. And if we make enough progress on financing, both for adaptation and loss and damage, then I think we can also unblock some of the mitigation problems where some of the developing countries, well, quite rightfully say, well, we were not part of the problem. We know that we have to reduce our CO2 emissions, but please, can you live up to your own commitments in terms of finance? It's the old traditional rift at every COP, this time again in new words, new terminology, new concepts, but it's the old mother of all political questions, redistribution. If we deliver on this COP, I am optimistic that the next one will deliver on a mitigation plan that keeps the 1.5 degree alive.
Mr. Jette?
Yeah, I agree with Diederik. This morning we had a ministerial meeting and listening to ministers from vulnerable small island states or the minister from Pakistan. Very strong messages to all of us that we need to keep track on the 1.5 degrees target. And EU, but also several other countries are now upgrading their NDCs and getting closer and closer to the 1.5 degree scenario. So it's still possible. And in the upcoming 12 months, I think we could have some other countries also joining us in better NDCs than they've delivered so far. And on climate financing, yes, the EU is taking its fair share, but we are also now finally contributing to a constructive dialogue on loss and damage. And we also have to take into account that it's not only public financing that will get us to the 100 billion or not only public financing that will create a solution for the loss and damage negotiations. We also need private funding. We need the investment banks to step up their games. They haven't done enough. So we all call upon them to take their responsibility, because if we can get the money rolling in the right direction, we can do a lot of great things in the upcoming years, both on mitigation and adaptation and also loss and damages.
Maybe a follow-up question on this. Yesterday, as a Dutch delegation at the Interparliamentarian Union, we were speaking to a delegation of South Africa, and they were a bit concerned about the private investments and saying, well, what if we start something, but then the private investment gets withdrawn? What will happen then? And we are stuck with the bad results. Can you maybe comment on this issue?
Well, I think South Africa is a very interesting country at the moment, because they obviously face huge challenges on energy prices, but also on the electricity grid, on scaling up renewables. There's a huge opportunities in South Africa. And together with the International Energy Agency, we've made actually a very concrete plan how to decarbonize the energy sector in South Africa. And making these international plans with the backing of several developed countries, we can really support, in this case, South Africa, and make sure that private investment is not just a promise, but is actually part of a concrete action plan for the upcoming decade. And we are now negotiating with several other countries, Vietnam, Senegal, you probably know the full list, but I think this is the way forward to really engage with these countries, not just on one simple project, but on a concrete program for the upcoming decade.
Okay, I get a sign that Mr. Samson has to leave a bit early today. But if that's the case, then I would at least have the opportunity for the members of parliament who are here, that they can ask their question also to Mr. Samson. I'm looking at Jessie, she's from Ireland. Is there a question you would like to ask?
Hi, my name is Jessie Till. I'm not from Ireland, I'm from Luxembourg. I'm the youngest member of Luxembourgish Parliament. I'm also a member of the Green Party, and I studied environmental physics, and I specialized on industrial risks and environmental risks. So I was wondering about a project I heard that you are planning on building 2 more nuclear plants in the Netherlands. And I wanted to ask, how can you waste so much money? Because it will be super expensive, it will take time which we don't have, and it's not a solution because it's not a problem for the younger generation. We will need to take care of your waste that you are creating and the risk that you are creating, and I want to ask, how can you waste so much money instead of investing in renewable energies which are safe? Thank you.
Thank you, and my apology for saying that you were from Ireland. Yesterday evening we met and there was a colleague from Ireland as well. I'm glad I remembered your name, sorry. So.
I'm quite aware of the Luxembourg position on new nuclear plants in Europe, so I was actually expecting this question. But I'm looking at Dutch MPs, and we've had I think a 2-decade debate on nuclear in the Netherlands. And we have agreed that we will invest in 2 new nuclear plants. We have one small one at the moment. It will close down in 10 years' time. We are now working together with some private companies to make sure that the risk management and the financial management is acceptable for Dutch taxpayers, is also acceptable in terms of nuclear waste for future generations. And what I would like to stress is that we are massively investing in wind on the North Sea. The North Sea will become the electricity hub of Northwestern Europe. 80% of our energy mix will come from wind farms on the North Sea. We are now a European leader in installed solar PV as the Netherlands. Who would have expected that? And we are finalizing the energy mix with 2 new nuclear plants that will be responsible for a maximum 10% of our energy mix. So in my opinion, this is a very balanced energy mix for the Netherlands, and it's the only way for us to deliver on a decarbonized electricity sector by 2035, because that is our ambition, that we will have a decarbonized electricity mix by 2035, so that we can decarbonize the industry not only in the Netherlands but also in the western part of Germany. And I think that is the best way forward to take our responsibility.
So I heard you could stay a bit longer. That's really good. So I don't know if you want to comment on the question from Jessie, but I think I have a colleague from Belgium.
I don't want to mix. Belgium is in between the Netherlands and Luxembourg. We moved also to giving nuclear again a place. Not everyone in the government is as convinced as that, but we are putting. But my question was, does not fundamentally we have to learn a lesson that we need a diversified energy mix? Not only stable production, intermittent production, but also the issue today of the geopolitical dependence. We don't like Russian gas, but we buy Middle East gas, Saudi Arabia oil. We will have for batteries products from elsewhere, and we are all very keen on hydrogen, but and with South Africa, but we don't know which regime will bear in the future. So I hope that not only the Netherlands but the EU will have a policy of a real diversified and long-term energy mix, because the lesson we have learned, we misjudged the possibility of short-term transition. So always saying move quicker on wind and solar, you cannot, by doubling the money, doubling the speed, and you create new dependency. I wanted your opinion on that. Thank you.
Yes?
Well, the short answer is yes, of course. We need to learn that lesson, and we think we are implementing it right now. The most diversified energy sources, and actually the energy sources that are abundant all over the planet, are renewables. So it's not for nothing that we put a lot of eggs in that basket, but not all our eggs. Because indeed, nuclear will be part of the energy mix in Europe. It's now, it will be in the future, and in our models it will still be in 2050. Maybe, and that's my only comment on nukes, you shouldn't build the old generation. You should build newer ones. I'm an optimist about technology, and then you can't be selective. You can't say solar and wind are great and nuclear will not get anywhere, never. But to be honest, the plants that are currently planned are still the old generation. Maybe we should learn from that too. So the energy mix will be diversified, and indeed the new, let's say, new kid on the block in our policy making is resilience on raw materials. Yes, if we make all our batteries out of lithium, we will have a problem in a few years' time. That's why innovation should go on, and it does, at mind-boggling speed. So new generation of batteries, up to batteries made out of steel, are available. Not at the prices that we need them right now, but in 10 years' time that could be different. So the overall lesson that I learned is actually that we should speed up all that transition, actually disrespective of the fact whether there's a crisis or not. Because I'm a little worried that when things get back to normal, and let's hope, for God's sake, that things get back to normal in Ukraine very soon, I'm a little worried that at that moment we will all fall back in our chairs and think, okay, problem solved, while it's not. So the work that we've started right now, maybe for the wrong reason, we should continue for the right reason.
I saw our colleague from France reacting to the words of Mr. Samson. Maybe you want to react?
No, I don't want to talk about nuclear power because I'm French, and when we're French, we always have to talk about nuclear power. Nuclear power, I think, is one part of electric mix, but we cannot rely only on that. And that was a mistake we did in France. And now in France, we are late on renewable energy, and we have problem right now because we have problem with our reactors, which are getting older, and we have nothing else. And it's really a problem. And that's why I think we have to stop opposing sources of energy. We don't have time to that right now. We have problem with nuclear waste, for example. Security. It is not, we cannot say, okay, there's no problem. We have to do with that. But the emergency right now is to decarbonize, is to decline our greenhouse gas emissions. And we talk about production, but we don't talk about our behaviors. And I see in France that too many people don't want to change anything. We talked about young people involved. We talked about one part of the population aware of the problems. And I think this summer with the forest fire, were shocked by what happened. But I have a part of my population in France, and I think it's the same everywhere else, who don't want to change anything. I received last week a prize. I was very happy with that, a prize because of my legislation. People cannot cannot drink on a terrace without being frozen, because I stopped terrace heating. I thought it was obvious. I thought everybody will agree with that. It's not the reality. That's why I think we need to continue to make people understand that we can change. And if we want to have everyone on board, I think we can present it not as a burden, but as an opportunity. And what I want to say to everybody is to talk about climate change not only as a threat, but as a positive opportunity for our children, for you, and to build together new economy, new chances. Because when I see young people outside here, inside here, I see too people like my daughter. She's not here, and she doesn't care. It's what she said. But I think she is, as so many friends of her, just frightened by her future. She doesn't know what we are drawing, what we are planning for them. And it's not only to save them, but to draw them something positive. Okay, I think you understood what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So the terrace heaters, maybe the minister wants to say something about this. Then I go to this fine guest, and then to the ladies over here.
Well, I've been talking to a lot of small businesses in the Netherlands with terrace heaters. I'm like, buy some blankets or buy these new cushions that can also heat you instead of a gas heating system, which is ridiculous in these times. So congratulate you on that policy. But I think Barbara just stressed out a very important topic, and the IPCC was very clear about it as well. Behavioral change can make up 30% of our carbon reduction in the upcoming decade. So what we are doing in the Netherlands, and we've done it now with energy efficiency measures as well, is a lot of public campaigning, informing people about what they can do, because a lot of people do want to make a difference, do want to be part of the transition, but don't know how to. So we can help them by informing them and giving them the opportunities to do so, and then we can really speed up the transition by behavioral change. And young people are probably the best way forward, but I agree with you, not all young people are as involved as these young people in this audience, so perhaps we can learn from you guys how to engage more youngsters around Europe. Thank you.
You want to react also on the behavioral aspect?
No, but it's good that in every conversation, at some point, it turns to behavioral change. The confrontational fact is that in this room, we can do with half the lighting and then still be comfortable with this seminar. There's no problem to turn half of these lights off. And if everybody does this in this conference, we make a little drop in the ocean, but as a symbolic gesture, it might help.
So now the floor is up to you.
That applies probably to all of Sharm el-Sheikh, where it's very much enlightened. My name is Eric ter Hark. I'm the chairman of the Benelux Business Roundtable. I have a very simple question. We have recently seen an announcement by one of the largest chemical companies in the world to withdraw investments or no longer invest in Europe and move investments to China and the United States. My question is, are we comfortable, and I say we, that we do enough to preserve the industrial network in Europe, given the competition that we see. We already touched upon it with the IRA, but also with what's happening in China, that competition will only increase. So at the European and at the national level, what is your gut feeling? Are we doing enough?
Thank you.
Well, I will not comment on that specific company because simply I'm not allowed. But in general, it's true that the current gas prices in Europe are obviously making us into a very expensive energy island. Paying about 100 euros per megawatt hour is killing part of our industry. Well, luckily we are also the wealthiest continent on the planet. So Europe has put in place all kinds of temporary state aid frameworks, so countries can help their industry. The Netherlands is doing that. All countries are doing that. We are helping countries to help their industry. But this can't go on for years. We can sustain this situation for the next 2 years, maybe 3. And then we need to get out of this hole, and we need to be in a better situation in terms of our energy supply. We can only do that by 2 things: finding alternatives and saving our energy consumption. Everything else is just shifting deck chairs on the Titanic. The only fundamental solutions are invest in alternatives, save energy. If we do that for the next 3 years, we will be out of trouble in 3 years' time. Meanwhile, we have to help our industry get through this winter, or actually through 3 winters.
Thank you. Minister Jette.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, these high gas prices are a huge issue for the European industry, and we're all worried that the strategic autonomy of the European Union is in danger, actually. So we have to do some short-term measures, but most of the bigger companies I'm speaking to actually have a very simple question. How many years does it take to get me on the electricity grid? Or how many years does it take to get me on the hydrogen backbone? Because we are willing to pay a higher energy price as a company if we know that in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time we're part of this enhanced grid, or we're part of that hydrogen backbone, so that we can make our investment decision as a company. So I think this is the biggest task for governments, to speed up the permitting for the energy transition, to speed up the permitting for the energy infrastructure, so that we get it there in time and that companies can invest and take their responsibility as well.
So, and now a question from you.
Yes, thank you so much. And maybe I can start with also thanking you for, you know, all the effort and hard work that you're doing. Truly, I think it's what we need. So my question is about this. Very often we say that, you know, we need to make the polluter pay instead of paying the polluter. But sometimes I feel like we're doing the opposite. If I look at the context of us in the Netherlands, we see that on the one hand, we're giving out a lot of subsidies to have these transformations made in industry. But on the other hand, what we're not doing is writing the bills for environmental costs, for social costs to these companies, to make them pay for the pollution that they're doing. And maybe it's just a thought experiment, but I really want to hear from you and also maybe have the audience think in what sort of a world we could be living in if we get these companies to actually pay the bills for water depletion, to pay the bills for toxins and chemicals released into the atmosphere. I think that would create natural incentives for them to become more sustainable, because in theory, it's actually the system, the rules of the system, that makes sure that these companies don't have to take accountability for the broader impact that they're having on society. So I think my question is, when are we going to get them to pay the bills for environmental and social costs?
Well, they are. Not for all environmental pollution, and I agree that we don't have the same system for toxification of the environment, for depleting natural water resources, because it's hard to monetize it. But it can be done. And there's one very good example, that's the ETS, the emission trading system. Companies are paying the bill for emitting CO2. And only recently they started to pay the real price. Before that, there was artificial low prices. But now, since a year or 2, companies are really paying 60, 70, 80 euros per ton. And that's actually the transitional price, as we've seen. So solar, wind become profitable at those prices. New technologies very soon, like hydrogen steel, etc. And this is the way to go. So I feel encouraged also by your question, first of all, to continue with the ETS, to strengthen it, as we will very soon, and also think about expanding it to other parts of the environmental problem, because we haven't addressed that enough.
Do you have something to add, Minister Jetten, or yeah, if you could use that microphone?
No, yeah, what we've learned over the past 9 months is that pricing is very effective because the ATS price, but also the gas price was the biggest change actually for a lot of companies to finally take up energy efficiency and to finally make the investment decisions they should have taken a few years ago. So I think the Fit for 55 package and all the strengthening of ETS 1 and the implementing of ETS 2 will be crucial in reaching our climate targets. The Netherlands, but also several other countries, are also putting in place national forms of taxation on carbon emissions. And my big wish is that we can finally agree on aviation and the maritime sector, because we have to tax aviation and the maritime sector to keep those sectors moving as well. That is, I think, crucial in the upcoming years.
Thank you. Our colleague from Greece, the floor is yours.
I am Haraka Fadari, member of the Greek Parliament. Congratulations for this discuss, which is very interesting. And I want to two questions. First of all, in Dutch, in Netherlands, do you apply policies of capture of storage energy? I think it is very serious as we work at the green transition, we say. The first of this question, and the second question is about hydrogen, and especially green hydrogen. I think that this sector must be more applied, and what you have done in your country, how you see this sector of energy, hydrogen, and use it at first at transportation, for example, because we speak about nuclear energy and all this, but I think must say that nuclear energy is not renewable energy. It's something else. And my opinion, and our opinion, must not be used this kind of energy only for medical reasons. You understand what I mean? Thank you. These two questions.
Okay, and thank you. And can you give the microphone to your neighbor over there? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think a big thank you to Greece, because you've shown great solidarity in this energy crisis. For example, mainly for your neighboring country, Bulgaria. And this really showcased that Greece can play a very vital role in that region of the EU to make sure there is energy supply, security of supply, not only for Greece but also for your neighboring countries. And now we're doing it with extra LNG, but I'm sure that Greece can also play a very important role in the upcoming years as a green hydrogen producer and a gateway to other countries in that part of the EU to really transport the green hydrogen into your hinterland. And that's actually the same role the Netherlands is playing in northwestern Europe. We are investing heavily in wind farms on the North Sea. We will produce green hydrogen with electrolyzing capacity in our harbors. And we will build the hydrogen infrastructure not only for the Dutch industrial clusters, but also to Germany and Belgium, so that we can transport the green hydrogen to our neighboring countries. Even the Czech Republic, Slovakia are very interested in what the Netherlands are doing, because we can also deliver to those countries. So we will focus the green hydrogen, both production and imports, mainly on decarbonizing our industries in the upcoming years. But within 8 years' time, it will also be crucial for our heavy transport, as you've said. And in that way can play a vital role in reaching our climate targets and making sure that we have a security of supply, not only for the Netherlands but also for neighboring countries. And I think Greece can play a same kind of role for that part of the EU. Thank you.
Okay, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Jessica, and I wanted to bring back the conversation to something that was briefly mentioned, which was a conversation on loss and damage, and that we are engaging on that. You compared it to the response to COVID crisis, and what we saw there is that we had a great response within Europe, but that we left African countries behind, and we hoarded a lot of vaccines. And we saw a geopolitical response there in the UN Security Council when there was a vote to condemn the actions of Russia, and a lot of African countries actually abstained from that vote. I'm lucky enough to have a lot of good friends here. One of them is Adenike. She's from Nigeria, and she's here to raise awareness on the situation around Lake Chad. It's shrinking, people are losing their lives and their livelihoods. So my question is, I want to be able to look my friends into the eye and say that the EU and the Netherlands are doing enough. And right now, I don't feel that we are doing enough in that sense. What is your view on a finance facility for loss and damage? I understand that there are other ways to get people money, but I also understand that this is about justice, this is about a historical responsibility, what we have done as EU countries, and what our response is to that. So I want to send a strong signal also to other countries to restore this trust, and I feel it's the right thing to do. So I want your response on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe we can have 3 questions in one, because time is running out. We only have 7 minutes left, and 2 more people also want to ask questions. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, so the next question is about something we've been talking about before, about behavioral change. So in order to change our behavior, we have to stop the PR machine of the fossil fuel industry. So we have to ban all fossil advertising. And as the European Union calls upon member states to develop a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, I think this could be a very good starting point, because it's super cheap, it can be done by tomorrow, and it makes space for real behavior change. So my question is, would that be a good idea to, as a first step in the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, to ban all fossil advertising?
Thank you, and now the floor to you. Yeah? Yeah, I hope it holds.
It does so far, so thank you. So
can you hold the microphone really for your mouth? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So I'm from the Dutch Youth Climate Movement, Minister Jetten was just talking about. Thank you for that. So we also just started a European branch of the Dutch Youth Climate Movement, and we find it really important that we, of course, make sure the voices of youngsters are being heard. And right now we notice that we're being listened to, and that's really fine, of course, but when we look at all the policies, we're still not aligned with the 1.5 degrees. So how can we make sure that the voices of youngsters all over Europe are more amplified within the European Union?
So the floor is up to Mr. Samson.
I take the loss and damage, and then because the answer is actually we learned from the COVID cynicism basically around the world. The EU was not the only one here, but we learned that sharing wealth is already pretty difficult. Sharing our health was apparently not possible. So that was a cynical period that we have luckily overcome. We also watched the vote in the General Assembly of the UN. We concluded that we had homework to do. We did homework. The second vote in the General Assembly was much better in terms of African countries joining the cause. But meanwhile, we have signaled, and we will signal at this COP, that the EU stands ready to work on loss and damage. But that's only the beginning. Because as we will see here in this COP, and I will describe the next few days for you, obviously the G77, and rightfully so, will scream for a facility, a fund. But if we don't pay attention, if we're not careful, it's going to be an empty shell. Because another fund on top of the funds that we already have is not the solution in itself. Instead of what we need to do, and we need to do that with all the expertise that we can muster from member states, from others, we need to go into the problem, analyze what is actually loss and damage, how can we pay for it, how can we help countries, because there's no one size fits all. There's a very big difference between Pakistan and Nepal and Tuvalu and Marshall Islands in terms of their loss and their damage. And we need to set up a framework that strengthens our ability to help them. Not with empty promises. So this COP will need a commitment from the global north, including the EU, to work on it and pay for it. And then hopefully, if that process can be established with mutual trust between all parties, next COP we could come to the conclusion about the size of that framework, the shape of it, and the amount of it. I don't want to preempt that result, but I'm optimistic that we can get there.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think the fact that it is on the agenda is also because of a constructive approach from the European Union. And I feel full support from the Dutch Parliament to be part of that conversation. I've been talking to some African countries today and yesterday that are also anxious that too much focus on loss and damage will harm everything we have to do on adaptation, because we are still facing financial issues on adaptation and we still have a lot of adaptation projects also to address. But looking at all the extreme weather events this year, no one can tell me that there is no such thing as loss and damage. So we do know that we have to act on it, and this COP will not be the final conclusion on loss and damage, but if we do not deliver a pathway forward for the upcoming COP, then we haven't done enough during this week. So loss and damage, the European Union and all its member states will play a constructive role in it. We've discussed a ban on fossil advertising many times, and I think it's very good that we're having this conversation not only in the Dutch Parliament but also in the Dutch society. I have asked behavioral scientists that are advising my policies to come up with an advice on fossil fuels so that we can use it during our policy making in next spring. So we will get an advice on the effects on advertising and whether it would be beneficial or not in changing behaviors at home. And to conclude on youngsters, yeah, I think it's the interesting thing is that there are so many young people here, and what Dirk had said during his opening statement, I think that is actually the case. You are here to keep the policymakers, to wake up the policymakers, but I think it's even more important that young people at home keep on demonstrating, keep on negotiating, keep on reaching out to all the policymakers, to their parents, to teachers, whatever, to really get the change going. Thank you.
So now we have 3 more questions, and then I would like to ask Mr. Waver William also to react on the loss and damage that was raised. And then as last speaker, I would like to give the floor to our colleagues from Italy, because they are here as well, and we would like to hear from them also, and then last remarks, and then it's already 5 o'clock. So brief, short question, please. Come on here.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Kyrios Kostos. I'm a young engineer here at the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, and I'm helping to present the global voice of young engineers at COP. So first of all, thank you very much for introduction to the kitchen table discussion. As a young professional, I would like to have my morning coffee with a little bit of policy discussion. So yeah, but in all seriousness, it is very important to continue engaging young professionals in policy making on a continuous basis, so we can continue really pushing the level of ambition and ensure that our ambition is in line with the 1.5 degree climate change scenario. So in that regard, as an infrastructure professional, I'd like to ask you what is the Netherlands and the European Union is doing with regards to ensuring that infrastructure sector is compliant with the 1.5 degree climate change scenario, because at the moment not all infrastructure projects, including major projects, are assessed for whole life carbon, and also in many cases we don't know when we build something whether it's actually compatible with our national contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. And next question is.
Hi, my name is Niels Hazekamp. I work at Bovens in the Netherlands. My question is regarding Repower Europe. We understand that the Netherlands has published its policy on implementing the COP26 statement, that it can make exclusions for new LNG projects and new LNG shipping under the Repower Europe program. The IPCC, the EIA are very clear that no new infrastructure can be built to keep global warming to 1.5. So my question to you is, how does the Netherlands, but also other European countries, make sure that we stay within 1.5 degrees not build any new LNG infrastructure, and also not support it via export credit agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mert.
Thank you indeed, Diederik and Rob, for these amazing questions and before. I want to bring the topic back to geopolitics, and when I would like to discuss, I'm standing here, my name is Mert Kumru on behalf of World Suit for Climate Justice, and I would like to bring it back on the ICJAO campaign that's been brought up by Vanuatu. Diederik, you have already indicated your support for this in the past, but we're currently looking to get this resolution that's being brought up at the UNGA this year to get as much support. And we really would like to ask all of you, all of the European member states and all of the Dutch government too, to get that support, because when we talk about geopolitics and we talk about small island developing states, people tend to forget that the Netherlands themselves also have small island developing states. So when we talk about the rise of waters right now, it's not only something that's happening in the Pacific, and that's why I'm wearing this flower in solidarity with the people in the Pacific, and we're also talking about people in the Netherlands themselves. So my question is, would you like to become one of those champions and help us advocate for the ICJAO campaign of Vanuatu at the International Court of Justice this year? Thank you.
Casper, could you also give the floor now to the colleagues of, thank you, Italy.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for invitation, and for us it's an honor to participate of this meeting. We listen many questions about, from young people, and for the future of Europe in leadership role for the against climate change in this COP. So we are very happy to be with you. And I hope this COP can be a good target for our ambition. And thank you for your meeting. Thank you. Bye.
Well, thank you for being here. Final remarks to our two guests here, and then I'll go to Waver William for his final remarks, and then we have to wrap up this meeting, unfortunately.
Okay, then I will be short. On infrastructure, we can do a lot more. We have started that work in the context of the Connecting Europe facility, and looking at the climate proofing of all that infrastructure. But in all honesty, we are just scratching the surface. So if you can help us, that would obviously be a great thing. I'm skipping questions because of the time, but on the ICG, I think it's a very interesting case. But I think that's partly because it's coming from civil society. Yeah, obviously brought forward by one country because that's how it works in the world of the ICG, but it's sponsored by the civil society. And we've discussed it internally in my team and within the Commission, and we actually decided to sit back a little and wait for it to happen. Obviously, if you need our support, we are always there. But we don't think it becomes a stronger case if big governments start joining it. I think it becomes a strong case if society screams for it. And yes, I can guarantee you at some point, way too late to your taste, the EU will then also join. That's in our job description. Be a little too late at the party. But I think it reflects also the atmosphere of this COP, where the civil society, it's actually the only UN conference where civil society has such a strong voice. And here in this country, it's a little more cumbersome than normal, but still, you are a strong voice. So I only want to plead to all of you, keep up that strong voice, because it moves us forward.
Thank you. On infrastructure, yeah, there's a lot to be done. Before I became a member of parliament, I was working on the railway sector on big infrastructure projects, and what I learned is that you can do a lot of things that the older people are telling you, no, we've always done it like this, but just keep on asking them questions, and then a lot of things are possible, especially in the way we use concrete in infrastructure projects. And I think we need stricter regulation just to really use all the techniques that are already there. On the Repower EU and new infrastructure, I think for the Netherlands, but also for Germany and several other countries, it's very clear. We only allow investments in the short term for LNG if it's hydrogen ready. because we need some LNG in the upcoming years to get through the winters, but we want to replace the LNG by green hydrogen as soon as possible, and that's one of the reasons why we are joining the H2 Global initiative for 300 million euros from the Dutch Climate Fund. And on the Vanuatu resolution, the Dutch government and some big Dutch companies already know what the end and the result of the ICG advice will be. Namely, human rights are very important when it comes to climate policies. We've lost a lot of cases as the Dutch government, and it was our wake-up call to really speed up the climate transition. So as soon as we know the text of the resolution of Vanuatu, I'm quite confident that the Netherlands is able to support it, but we're actually waiting for the resolution text to be drafted and distributed to other states, and I think EU and EU member states are ready to support it as soon as the text is there. Thank you.
Thank you, and then now we go to Waver William in the Seychelles to have his final remarks and also on the questions that were also asked to you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I feel that the loss and damage issue should be something that in the next COP can be something that could be finalized. And I understand the complexities around it, but we should, focus so that we can have something around this in the next COP. But I would like also to add that we should also look at the opportunity side of climate change and try to put a lot of attention to it, because I believe that we should be focusing on the opportunities of climate change. But you know, I'm a little bit confused, and I've been listening to all the debates and all the talks. It's as if we are in a concert, but we are not in unison with each other in terms of all the musical instruments being played. We know that the song is about climate change, but I feel that at some point there's some sort of disconnection in terms of how to move ahead. For example, in terms of the global governance structure, I feel that the political will, the inclusivity of key actors are still missing, because discussions are being held ad hoc, and I feel that we should also be looking at the international legal frameworks, aligning it with the national legal framework, because unless we can have something very concrete, I feel that time is not on our hands. This is my comment. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and the entire room here looks really serious at the moment because of what you just said. So thank you, Waver William, for your comments. And thank you also, Mr. Diederik Samson and Minister Rob Jetten, for coming here. And of course, you as the audience, asking your questions, the people online. And I'm going to close this meeting, and I wish you a very blessed night, and let's hope for good results at this COP. Thank you very much.